Well, they come as if from outer space in a variety of weird guises. Defender, Pac-Man, asteroids. To fans, they represent a challenge. But to critics, as Terry Drinkwater reports, they are a menace.
The year is 1993. It's been a while since a new Pac-Man game was released, yet he was still instantly recognizable. And as the world became more and more obsessed with gaming, primarily in the 16-bit era, Namco decided that now was the time to get to work bringing new Pac-Man titles to these new systems, in an attempt to keep the name alive. Sure, you had him pop up in the odd cameo, including the 1989 Japanese version of Family Pinball, and there was even a Namco-produced arcade puzzle club game that too unsurprisingly never got released or properly finished. But the real first attempt at a new game was actually heavily inspired by Tetris. Heck, the game even went under the name Pactris originally, and Namco even took out a trademark with that name. It's assumed that this, of course, was too close to the Tetris name, and in the end the game was released as Pac Attack. Now, originally this game wasn't even a Pac-Man game, but instead in the beginning days of the game's release it was using a completely different Namco property, and that property was Cosmo Gang, a spin-off to a more popular Elemecha machine that you would find in arcade centres that required you to shoot little wobbly pink aliens as they came towards you with as few shots as possible. That got changed into a fairly typical puzzle game in the arcades because why not? That then got ported onto the Super Famicom, but considering the Cosmo Gang weren't exactly well known outside of Japan, they decided to westernize it by swapping all of the sprites to Pac-Man sprites. This not only worked completely fine, but was actually arguably better than what came before it. You see, in this game your job is to survive for as long as you can and build up a nice score along the way. You can do this by getting your long lines from left to right in typical Tetris fashion, but more interestingly you also drop ghosts too, and the real aim of the game is to try your best to create a line of these ghosts so that when you do eventually drop Pac-Man, he can fall down and hopefully complete a ghost path and take out everything in his way. When it comes to these super simple puzzle games that are obviously inspired by Tetris, they're obviously not as good as Tetris, and this game is obviously not as good as Tetris, or Pac-Man for that matter. However, it is a good game, and you will want to keep coming back again and again to try and master that Pac-Man path. And, well, I would say this is a good contender for the not as good as Tetris crown. For Namco, it did wonders. Games like this do not take long to make, and they obviously do not take long to port either, which is of course a good thing, as it's still getting ported to pretty much every console imaginable and doing so with absolute ease. I'm playing on the Evercade, and for a system like that, it's absolutely perfect. And before moving on, it is probably worth bringing up Pac Panic, an unreleased game for the CDI that would have featured a beautifully animated intro sequence in all of its typical Zelda CDI glory. Anyway, moving on. Pac-Man 2: The New Adventures. Yes, Pac-Man is finally getting a true sequel, apparently. Although this does feel more like a spin-off to Pac-Land than the original Pac-Man game, as this is made from a side-on perspective, just like that game was. The big difference, however, is the fact that this is instead a point-and-click adventure, of sorts. You see, you do not actually control Pac-Man. Your job is to be you, shooting a slingshot at the world around Pac-Man in order to help the game progress. It's a massive case of trial and error. Will shooting this thing help? Who knows? Sometimes certain events don't necessarily hurt, kill, or continue the story of Pac-Man, but instead can completely change the mood of the main character, which ultimately changes his view as you go on in the game. In Japan, it's called Hello Pac-Man, which has incredible artwork, by the way, showing a very stylized Pac-Man jump up in that typical wahoo sort of fist bump pose, whereas on the European cover, you see him on a ledge about to dive off with a hang glider all happy, and on the American cover you see him mid-air on said hang glider screaming in terror. It's really strange, but in actual fact, it makes total sense when you actually play the game. Pac-Man's mood swings jump around so frequently, he's bordering on bipolar. It's a really strange entry involving you needing to complete certain basic errands put forward by Miss Pac-Man, such as get some milk for the baby or get some flowers for the neighbour, but of course it's what happens along that journey that makes it all worthwhile. The best way I can compare a game like this is it's trying to do for the point-and-click adventure genre what Pikmin did for the RTS type genre, taking something that pretty much everyone will agree is 100% better on a computer, or at least with a mouse, and getting that formula to work with a controller. Did they pull it off with Pac-Man 2? Well, actually, kind of. The game does a good job of letting you know how Pac-Man feels with his incredible animation, something that is very common in that genre. But even that can be odd, and few of the action-based sequences can feel quite rough around the edges too. And you will be completely dumbfounded for a lot of your playthrough of this game.
So, you got friends, but imagine if you had one special friend.
Hi, I'm your buddy.
One that would do anything for you.
Here, drink this. Chewy. Wear this.
Well, you can with Pac-Man 2, the cool interactive cartoon. He's your best pal, and no matter how much you abuse him, he'll still come back for more. So get Pac-Man 2 for Sega and Super NES.
Hit the box.
I mean, what are friends for?
In my opinion, you shouldn't believe the hate when it comes to this game. This is actually a game that's definitely worth trying, just to experience what it was like when Namco was happy to experiment with their flagship mascot. Sadly, it never got a sequel because it does feel like the first step to something much, much better. And speaking of mixing things up, Namco wasn't done yet, as the very next game did that very thing. You see, the year was 1995 by this point, and whilst Namco was busy with the first of its PlayStation Museum compilations, those are the games that each spell out a single digit of the Namco name, by the way, on the Super Nintendo, we got another side-on Pac-Man game. However, this one was titled Pac in Time, and again, it wasn't entirely original. Long-time viewers of the show would have noticed that this is actually a sort of reskin, or a reimagining if you will, of a game called Fury of the Furries, a follow-up to Squeak, which I have covered in the past on the Complete History show. However, it isn't exactly a copy of the game's layout, but instead a copy of that game's mechanics, and that's fine, because both games are actually pretty damn good. In the game, you control Pac-Man, obviously, and you need to use a sort of slingshot to swing around the game's maze-like levels. It's tough to master, but super addicted if and when you do. Your job is to find 30 pellets in each level before the exit door opens up, and you do this by swinging around, getting what you can, and eventually going through different coloured rings that give you new abilities. Green gives you the swinging rope ability, blue lets you swim, red gives you a hammer to smash through into other unreachable areas, and yellow lets Pac-Man shoot fireballs. Of course, the power pellets are here too to help you fend off the ghosts along your way, but other than that, well, that's it. It's a very basic idea that's crazy hard to master, but again, when you do, there is actually a lot to like about this game. And hey, if you actually do complete a game like this, then you can just go and pick up Fury of the Furries, which, as stated, is more of the same. And of course, it wasn't the end of Pac-Man on the 16-bit machines, as we also had Ms. Pac-Man return for a port of her classic game, and although I am trying to shy away from port talk in this documentary, otherwise it will quite literally quadruple its length, what I will say is that this port is simply excellent. Again, released on the Super Nintendo, and even more of the museum collections were put out on the PlayStation 1, this title is very much an overhaul, and according to many, is the superior version to play, even over the original. And as stated, many people see this as either the greatest sequel of all time, or even possibly one of the best arcade games of all time. Personally, I'm not in that camp, but as it has so many hardcore followers, I think it's definitely worth taking a look. Which is exactly what I'm going to do after another bit of confusing history. The game was originally ported by Tengen in 1990 for the NES, and as you may know, Tengen, a subsidiary of Atari, created the company to get around Nintendo's strict policy of only releasing a few games per year for the system. Tengen did just this. They released a few, but then behind Nintendo's back worked out how to get around the security chip of the NES and release games themselves without paying royalties to the Big Red. Miss Pac-Man was one of the earlier unofficial releases, not to be confused with Namco's own offering, which came out a few years later, which is not as good, and obviously both versions are not as good as the 1991 officially licensed Sega Genesis / Mega Drive release, which is of course the best. Come on. And obviously that version is also better than the Master System port, also created by Tengen, which is surprisingly different than the Game Gear port, which was done by Namco again, and just like Namco's NES port, it's nothing special. But thankfully, the officially released Super Nintendo port, which came out a few years later, which is the same as the Mega Drive / Genesis port, besides screen resolution of course, is actually a brilliant game. And well, what's all the fuss? Why am I bringing all this up as well as the arcade original? Well, firstly, the graphics have been boosted up a fair bit here. The screen now scrolls up and down, which isn't too much of an issue if it wasn't for the multiplayer, which is actually a brilliant addition. However, you do need to work together in this game, because if one of you does fall off the scrolling screen, it's very likely that you are going to lose the game. The game has several different difficulty levels and 36 maps in total. Some of the earlier ones are noticeably easier, but the challenge soon racks up. In my opinion, if you have one of these 16-bit machines, this, due to it simply being a Miss Pac-Man port in most people's eyes, is actually a bit of a hidden gem, and you will be surprised at how addictive this simple little title is. Whoa. Right, let's go back to the arcade, shall we, and go take a look at the awesome SU-2000 and SU-3000 arcade units. Yes, as the home console market quickly catches up with the newer 3D advancements in the arcades, it was of course arcade developers' jobs to show what these massive machines can do that your little grey PlayStation boxes at home simply couldn't. The SU-2000 and SU-3000 were essentially one of the earlier all-purpose arcade machines that made virtual reality readily available to arcade owners. The problem was, these machines were not very popular. Still, a Pac-Man game in VR called Pac-Man VR was indeed made for these systems. Sadly, it was never released. Very little is known about this game other than the fact that it is the original Pac-Man game, but in VR. Very little is known about this title, even though it has in more recent years actually been released officially by a company called Virtuosity, who obtained the rights, and you can actually go and buy it yourself for $100. The problem is, it was never ported. This $100 you're about to spend will only be for a game that only works on the SU-2000 and SU-3000 arcade virtual reality machines. And considering it was never finished, this is probably just a demo. The company behind this machine were none other than Virtuality, who had already had experience in this field with Sega on the incredibly rare Tech War arcade unit, and from what I've heard, it was hard to control, albeit an impressive for the time experiment that honestly has been redone a million times over by game makers for all of you standard VR headset owners. So, you know, just go and play one of those instead if you're interested in Pac-Man in first person. Which brings us to 1999, and home console gamers and home computer gamers could pretty much play Pac-Man on the majority of those systems. And whilst Namco was still pumping out Elemecha machines left, right and centre at every possible chance that they could, one game that seriously does not get enough attention is Pac-Man Arrangement, a game that was released in the arcades as a vertical game on the Namco Classic Collection Volume 2, and thankfully, this one has also been ported to a whole heap of collection sets. This game is a pretty decent overhaul of the original game. It features a new ghost called Kinky, yes, Kinky, and although at first glance this ghost doesn't actually do much more than act as a walking power pellet, meaning that when you eat them you can chase the others down, but they also, if left alone for too long, can actually upgrade the other ghosts with new abilities, allowing them to charge, jump across the screen, duplicate, spit out more dots for you to collect, and basically be a huge pain in the ass Aye. The stages and sprites have all been revamped here too, and Pac-Man himself even gained a few new abilities, being able to charge himself when going over certain sections and going up against a much bigger ghost at the end. Pac-Man Arrangement took what the original did, and Pac-Mania 2 I suppose, and really developed on that formula. Sure, it's completable in probably less than an hour, but I think it is definitely worth checking out if you've got an hour spare. Also guys, this game is not to be confused with the Pac-Man Arrangement that came out in 2005, which of course we will get to shortly. Yep. It's time for yet again Namco to jump into yet another video game generation with their flagship mascot Pac-Man, and just like they did with the 16-bit generation, they're going to be changing it up quite a bit, and what better way to do that very thing than to jump onto the platforming bandwagon. And when I say platforming bandwagon, I mean the 3D platforming mascot bandwagon, even though 3D platforming mascots by this point had been around for quite a while. Jumping Flash and Bug came out in 1995, Super Mario 64 and Crash Bandicoot came out the next year in 1996, Croc and Jersey Devil came out in 1997, Sonic Adventure and Spyro hit our shelves in 1998, and by the time of this next game's release in 1999, you had Earthworm Jim and even Donkey Kong making the leap to 3D, for better or worse. It's fair to say that the platforming boom wasn't quite what it was during the 16-bit era, but there was plenty of gamers out there, myself included, that craved these platforming games, and well, Pac-Man was still instantly recognizable, so obviously he was the perfect choice to put into a 3D platforming game. It was only a matter of time before someone took the role of making a new game in the franchise, and of course, that exact thing happened. A small team within Namco Home Tech were close to completion on whatever game they were working on in 1996, and whilst they finished off their work, the design team were tasked with making a new game. They got to work creating 4 pitches based on Namco properties and a further 4 pitches that were completely original ideas. After meeting the head of the studio, the 4 original ideas were scrapped and the team went back to further elaborate on the 4 Namco properties. You had a game based on Namja Town, which is a Namco-run Japanese arcade. You had one based on the horror brawler Splatterhouse. You had a new RPG that would feature the majority of Namco's flagship characters, and of course, you had a 3D platforming Pac-Man game. And even though the team wanted to make the RPG, the boss man wanted them to make a 3D Pac-Man game, which is exactly what they ended up doing. Bill Anderson was the guy put in charge of the small team, and he seemed like the obvious choice, working on plenty of incredible Mega Drive and Genesis titles such as Global Gladiators, Aladdin, Cool Spot, and The Jungle Book. Bill, just like everybody else, obviously wanted to take inspiration from the already released and utterly brilliant 3D platformers of the mid-90s, most notably Mario 64, but there was quite a big and very strange obstacle in their way. Japan was very worried about what Westerners would do with Pac-Man, so even though they were making a Pac-Man game, they were not allowed to use Pac-Man. This led Bill Anderson to come up with a story where a bunch of kids were teasing a younger kid at the arcade, pushing him away from all of the big gun-filled titles and telling them to beat it, we were here first, go play Pac-Man. Unhappy with this, but with no other games to play, he reluctantly does this very thing whilst ripping on the game's simplicity. The ghosts inside hear all of this mugging off and inform the leader of the Ghost Lord, who was based on the Mesmeron character from the Hanna-Barbera cartoon series, and he decides to suck him into the arcade machine with a pixel cannon, turning the player into Pac-Man, but not really Pac-Man, because he's actually a teenage lad who doesn't like Pac-Man, which has got to be the worst lead character in a Pac-Man game. But still, what other choice did these developers have? The game would have featured 14 open world themed areas after all of your typical platforming settings like ice worlds, desert worlds, spooky house worlds, temples, all that good stuff, and because you are in an arcade machine, not Pac-Man would not only fight the typical ghosts but also computing components such as capacitors, batteries, transformers and SCSI leads. And this game eventually got to about 40% complete before it was shown off at trade shows, and also to the boss men at Namco, who hated it. They fired everybody involved instead of the 3 main characters, scrapped the entire thing and told them to rework it. And rework it they did, even though plenty more hand-holding was indeed done until the finishing point and the new team released the game in late 1999, and it actually reviewed very, very well. Pac-Man from Pac-Man World has got himself a few new moves. You got a rev up dash mode, you can do this whole bouncy butt move too. It's pretty basic in all honesty, using both these moves to gain access to areas that a simple jump will not reach. And of course, because it's Pac-Man, the game has a whole heap of collecting going on too. And fair play, after all, he was one of the first to do this, right? The more dots and fruit you collected, the more points you get, just like before. These then get changed into new lives, and well, that's it. Yes, it's basic, but so was Pac-Man in the beginning. This is still a great little platformer. Sure, it's a tad rough around the edges. I mean, it was released in the UK at least 20 years after the original, and that just so happens to be over 20 years ago already. Damn, am I feeling old? I remember when my sisters bought this game new when it came out. Pac-Man World is a solid entry and a great revival for the series. It did what the 16-bit generation tried to do and completely butt-smashed it. In fact, when this game was shown off at trade shows, Scott Rogers, one of the main people working on the game, actually remembers people coming up and relating the gameplay experience to the original Pac-Man games rather than what came out on the 16-bit generation.
It was pretty cool to work on Pac-Man World. The greatest thing about being involved with it was when we were showing it at E3. Everyone had a Pac-Man story that they wanted to share, about how the original Pac-Man was their favorite game, or how they stole quarters from their mom to feed their Pac-Man habit, or how they loved the cartoon from the 80s. Pac-Man is like an old friend, and everyone got really excited about the game, and it felt good to be a part of that. A lot of people don't know about or remember Pac-in-Time or Pac-Land or any of the other Pac-Man platform games that preceded Pac-Man World. All they had in their collective memory was the original and Mrs. Pac-Man, so we had to live up to the original, and that was a tough act to follow. However, I think in the end, we were pretty successful.
Another interesting throwback that they added to the game was the mini levels based on the original top-down Pac-Man levels. And although these obviously do not play as well as the originals, it's yet again the perfect combination of merging the old with the new. It even has a couple of cameos thrown in for good measure, including a Gallagher-inspired level, a Puka from Dig Dug due to his immense popularity in Japan, and the final boss is a character called Tockman, which spelt in reverse is obviously Namcot. Nice. Following on from this, we have Ms. Pac-Man Maze Madness, and even though the top-down sections of Pac-Man World were surprisingly the weakest parts of that game, this game is nothing but those top-down maze-like levels. However, quite a bit has changed here. Yes, you still gotta munch the dots and you still gotta dodge the bad guys, but now you can stop and take your time, and more interestingly is the fact that these mazes are way more puzzle heavy. For fans of the original games, this is surprisingly one of the best follow-ups. It's instantly understandable and easy to work out what you need to do. Tackling those later puzzles can be a real head-scratcher. However, it never gets tiresome. The game really is a joy to play, and fair play to the old girl, because this game was also sponsored by Nabco, not Namco. Let's not get those two confused. Nabco are an organisation that helps spread the awareness of breast cancer, which again obviously is nothing but a good thing. In fact, this whole let's use arguably the most iconic female in all of gaming to promote breast cancer awareness thing continued on for a long ass time. Most notably in 2014 when your mobile featured 60 new mazes for Ms. Pac-Man to chomp her way around in. Again, nothing but a good thing. Now if only they used Pac-Man to help spread the awareness of testicular cancer. I mean, the man even looks like a pair of... Sadly, what was not so good was the fact that Ms. Pac-Man Maze Madness 2 which was obviously a follow-up to the 2000 game, did start development but sadly never got released. There are rumours that this game was cancelled due to it being based around about the time that Bandai and Namco were merging, and Bandai Namco didn't think the world wanted a new game in the Pac-Man formula. However, the validity of this claim has actually never been proven, so take that with a grain of salt. All we do know is that this game was never released, and that sucks. But never fear, time to dry your eyes, mate, because in the year 2000 we did get one final game before the world of mobile gaming opened up and gave us even more Pac-Man related games than we ever knew what to do with. The first game was Pac-Man Adventures in Time. Honestly, I'm not going to spend too long on it. It's a PC game created by Creative Asylum and Mind's Eye Productions. What you got here is basically a load of toned down Maze Madness levels, as in the typical maze levels without the puzzle mechanics. It has a few very basic Mario Party-esque levels in between, but that's about it. Perfect for people that wanted the best 3D maze-like levels that include Pac-Man himself, no real bells or whistles to this one besides the rather good overall design of the game. Get it if you really want more of the same, and keep your expectations in check with this title. Right, on to 2001, where the Adventures in Time game actually got itself a sort of sequel. Ms. Pac-Man Quest for the Golden Maze was pretty much the same game, but obviously taking its settings from Maze Madness. And the only other thing to mention here is that this is possibly the only Pac-Man game ever released to not feature Pac-Man himself. Also, this same year, we also got the very first Pac-Man mobile game that wasn't a typical port of the original Pac-Man game, called Pac-Match. This one is simply a rebranding of a game called Chain Shot from 1985, which just so happens to be what the game is called in Japan. And although it's virtually impossible to find nowadays, a Flash sequel called Pac-Match Party was released, which is essentially the exact same game and is still available. And whilst on the subject of Flash games, or at least Pac-Man Flash games, the very first Pac-Man Flash game was a game that was heavily focused on track and field, and it's as basic can get. Now, I'm not going to cover every single Flash and mobile variant in this video, as it will essentially take over the rest of the video. However, I will continue to drop in and out of the more notable titles that are worth mentioning, just like All I Want to Do Is Dance, which was used to promote the 2002 game Pac-Man World 2, which thankfully segments us perfectly into Pac-Man World 2. Which was unsurprisingly even more of the original. Now, unlike the original, this game was actually designed to be an open world game where Pac-Man could put on different types of shoes that made his control scheme work differently, such as rollerblades and flippy floppies. Collecting fruit could be turned into smoothies to give you more powerful power-ups similar to the Resident Evil titles. But of course, this all changed again to make it more like the original. Turns out that plenty of people loved the original. In fact, it sold over 1 million copies, so of course a sequel was well underway. And considering this game ended up being a multi-platform game compared to the original PlayStation 1 release, it thankfully was able to get into the hands of even more fans. Most people's memories with 3D Pac-Man games actually start here, but for those that played the original, there really isn't much to add. The second game is just like the first game. Obviously, with it being on PlayStation 2, it not only sold better, but was also way more refined. You got a much wider open space to explore on each level. However, the game does still try to take you down one singular path, and it does a good job of it. The controls and camera has also come a long way too. In short, if you like the original, then you're probably going to be liking the sequel. Yes, this game did very, very well. In fact, it became the PlayStation 2's 56th best-selling game of all time. And whilst we're here, we might as well bring up Pac-Man World 3, even though this does mean that we jump a good 3 years ahead to 2005, because Pac-Man 3 is pretty much a slightly better version of Pac-Man 1 and 2, but that wasn't always the way it was meant to be. You see, Pac-Man World 3 actually started its life as Pac-Man Adventures, which was still a 3D platforming game of sorts, set in a dirty, spooky, borderline Titan AE setting, which of course didn't really fit within the world of Pac-Man. Now, that actually makes quite a lot of sense when you find out that Don Bluth was the guy behind designing the game. You know, Don Bluth of Dragon's Lair, All Dogs Go to Heaven, and American Tail fame, all that jazz. Well, regardless, after its cancellation, Blitz Games were the people who ended up taking it on, and sadly, it wasn't clear sailing from here on either. Just like before with Ms. Pac-Man Maze Madness 2, when Bandai and Namco formed together, almost every single game in development got cancelled, including this one. Blitz Games just simply didn't want to give up on this title. They pleaded and pleaded with Bandai Namco, and finally they got the A-OK to finish it off, just as long as it was done extremely quickly and that no extra money was pumped into it. Blitz Games themselves had to pump some money into this game, and sadly, the end result wasn't exactly what they wanted. Because that result is a game that does indeed progress the moveset and feel of Pac-Man in a 3D space, making extra use of the dash roll and butt bounce, but also giving him the ability to punch too. Be careful what you wish for, guys. I, like many, always wanted to have another 3D Pac-Man game that pushed the character and world in new ways, and sure, we could argue that some of the levels found here are actually the best that they've ever been in a 3D game. The fighting mechanics? Not game-breaking in the slightest, but definitely not for me. Also, one last thing. This is the first game where Pac-Man speaks.
Sweetie, you're only as 25 as you feel.
Thanks, honey. You and Junior are the best presents I ever had. And you're right. I look fantastic.
Make of that what you will.
Is something wrong?
Honey, my Pac sense is tingling.
Overall, Pac-Man 3 is still a good game. It gets a lot of hate, mostly due to its setting, which feels more like one of the later Jak and Daxter games, but if you can look past it and get over the constant combat, what you have is a really solid roundup to the series. I enjoyed my time with Pac-Man World 3, sure I still think that the second entry is probably better, but considering its bumpy development, I think the end result is actually pretty interesting. Oh, and by the way, did you know that this was actually the first 3D Pac-Man game that was not released in Japan? This was most likely due to the merger, and the translation for this very heavy story-driven game would have been way too much of an undertaking, but still, I think it fits, as this was easily the most Western-created Pac-Man game to date. I doubt it would have done too well in Japan myself. Anyway, time to go back a few years, back to 2002, when the mobile scene were pumping out more Pac-Man games than people knew what to do with. Pac-Man Puzzle, Pac-Man Bowling, Pac-Man Slots, Pac-Man Casino, Pac-Man Pinball, and Space Invaders X Pac-Man. I've always wanted to play that last one. But back on the home consoles, Infogrames, who were responsible for the Adventures in Time and Quest for the Golden Maze titles, actually made a third game in their Pac-Man trilogy with the worst name possible. In fact, before I tell you about the game, let me tell you its title. Pac-Man All-Stars. What's wrong with that, I hear you ask? I mean, it worked for Mario All-Stars, right? Right, it did! You hear Pac-Man All-Stars and you think this is going to be yet another collection of classic games, and it wasn't. Because of this, the game actually got some fairly negative reviews, as it actually ended up being a top-down multiplayer dot collection game, best played with 4 players on a PC. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it would actually be a pretty solid 4-player game, but all this is a slightly advanced multiplayer mode from Maze Madness. It's as bare bones as you could possibly get, 4 mostly open spaces, not even mazes, with 4 Pac-Man characters running around, totally not worth your time. Later that same year, Pac-Man Fever was announced, not to be confused with the song of the same name, and as you may have guessed, this one is a Mario Party ripoff, and a bad one at that. It's a lot more accessible than, say, I don't know, Sonic Shuffle, playing as Pac-Man himself and several other Namco characters that really do not fit the setting at all. Those characters being Tiger and Heihachi from Tekken, Astaroth from Soul Calibur, and Rico from Ridge Racer, all in their super deformed state. It's really strange. Why they didn't use classic arcade characters like Gallagher, Dig Dug and Mappy is beyond me. The end result is a super basic board game-like game with very few mini-games, probably half of which are pretty awful to play, and after half a playthrough, it's likely that you've just seen all of what this game has to offer. In more recent years, it's come to light that the reason for the game's name is because the title screen was supposed to include the popular track by Buckner and Garcia. But due to no arrangement being agreed upon, this fell through, as did the DDR-inspired minigame that they wanted to add. What you end up with is a super rushed and downright terrible game that has actually scored even lower than the infamous 2600 port Stay Away at all costs. Damn, I hope it gets better from here on out. Thankfully, it did. Although most people didn't even know that the next game, Pac-Man Versus, even existed. Why? Because originally, you needed a copy of the game, which depending on where you were in the world could have been given away in a bundle on its own or in Japan only, available via the Nintendo Club point system. You needed a bunch of controllers, of course, you needed a link cable, you needed a Game Boy Advance, and you needed at least one friend.
The game was created by Nintendo themselves this time, which is why when playing the game, you actually hear Mario himself narrating the whole thing. The idea of the game is that on the GBA, you control Pac-Man in a top-down manner, chasing or running from the ghosts, whilst on the TV screen, you have a much more zoomed-in 3D mode, where the other players play as the ghosts running away from or chasing to get him. If you are able to get this all working together, what you have is a bloody awesome little party game. Obviously there isn't really enough of a game here to sell on its own, but it's still an excellent party game that I really do wish they released on a Wii U as a digital download, as that would have been the perfect system for this game. Thankfully, the DS also got a version which plays rather great, and the Switch also has it as part of its Pac Party compilation.
But again, you will need several Nintendo Switch consoles to play it properly. Sorry. Very recommended, as is Pac-Man Arrangement. Nope, it's not the same Pac-Man Arrangement as before, but instead a sort of sequel, if you will. To avoid this confusion, several later re-releases renamed this game to Pac-Man Remix, which is probably the better game. Anyway, as stated, it's very much a sequel, or I suppose a reworking of that original game from a decade prior, except this time it's for widescreen devices, most notably mobile phones, but thankfully also for the PSP. In the game, you go from left and right rather than up and down. Sure, it may be more of the same in that regard, but it is still utterly fantastic and well worth checking out. And heck, if you've got a chance, check out its unknown sequel called Pac-Man Arrangement Plus, which was a sequel only for the PSP, only available in Japan and Korea, that rebrands a good portion of the stages and loads of other classic Namco franchises into the mix. Right, we are indeed getting through these titles now, aren't we? It is now 2005 and this IP is far from slowing down. We have of course already jumped into this era a little bit with the odd port onto the newly released Nintendo DS, and when Namco saw this thing, they knew that they had to play around with it. Gamers and developers couldn't take their hands off the touchscreen, obviously, and for Pac-Man's first true new game, they actually recycled an old idea that Namco's game director Tetsuya Shinoda came up with when playing around with an old Apple PDA system. One of those clunky touchpads that transformed your handwriting into a text with the use of a stylus. He always really enjoyed the fact that when you crossed out mistakes, the characters on the screen would disappear in a poof of smoke. This stuck with him and he always wanted to implement it into an actual game, which was why a game was proposed within the walls of Namco but was thrown aside due to the small audience on one of those little PDA systems. However, when the Nintendo DS came about, they knew it was time to revive this, and they did that exact thing at E3 2004. In this tech demo, you are presented with a lined piece of paper and you'll see several ghosts appear as if they are drawn on the screen. You then draw Pac-Man's iconic shape in the direction that you want him to go and start chomping, and he goes that way. However, if the ghosts move out of the way, you can draw a lined wall in order to make him change the direction, similar to Choo Choo Rocket. And you do this until the ghosts are gone. Being that this was 2004, people were genuinely impressed with this tech demo, but saw it as nothing more than a tech demo. At the same show, Namco was showing off Pack and Roll, a Marble Madness style game where you roll around a yellow Pac-Man ball shaped face on the bottom touchscreen and see him move around a 3D world, dodging or chasing ghosts on the top screen. Again, being that this was the birth of the DS itself, people that got hands-on with this were genuinely impressed that it worked as well as it did. But still, they saw Pack and Roll as a full game and Pac-Pix as nothing more than a tech demo.
I didn't think this game could stand on its own, but it might make for good additional gameplay challenge in Pack and Roll. It's a really clever design and something that I've never seen before. Another notch in favour of the Nintendo DS system.
And these same impressions were felt throughout the majority of the entire gaming media that played it at the event. Everywhere I looked, people loved this idea, but saw it as nothing more than an idea. However, the director of the game, well, he apparently states that there was so much praise for these games that instead of merging them together, which was the original idea, they decided to make 2 different games. I'm sure the sales of the Nintendo DS had nothing to do with that decision. Pack and Roll came first, and although the idea is indeed basic, it actually ended up being a pretty solid title. What you have here is a game that is actually quite similar to the Pac-Man World series, with lots of open sections, with crazy amounts of ramps, of course, and just like all of the best games, your job is to collect as many pellets as possible before new areas open up, dodging and chasing ghosts. One of the cooler mechanics involves you gaining different hats that allow Pac-Man to gain different abilities. Now, rolling balls around maze-like worlds to get to the end is an obvious move for Pac-Man, and it's a gameplay style that pretty much has about 1,000 copycats on mobile platforms, let alone endless amounts on consoles, works perfectly for Pac-Man. Plus, the worlds are big enough to make this feel like a full-price game rather than a quick cash grab. People tend to really like this game, which was why it was re-released for the Wii as part of the Namco Museum Remix compilation, which in my opinion wasn't all that good. Featuring a lot of cut content and several remixes of older Pac-Man games, but not including the original. Very, very weird. As a DS game, I would actually go as far as saying it's a must-own. For the Wii, and then you got Pac-Pix, which got very average scores, as most reviewers, again, saw it as nothing but a glorified tech demo, which it totally was. However, for a game that goes for about £5 nowadays, you would be surprised at how much fun you will have with this one. Especially if you have the Japanese release, which pumps out a little fart when you draw an arse. For the time, it's essentially a shameless cash grab, but I can't deny that I actually had a lot of fun playing with this game. You will generally be surprised at how much is on offer here. Extra drawings that you need to make get added later on, like arrows you need to draw to shoot ghosts on the top screen and bombs for clearing areas. For me, the amazement came from seeing just how much the team managed to get out of such a simple mechanic. It's super short, but it never gets boring because it ends up being quite exciting seeing what weird mechanic the devs have thought up on the next set of levels. Again, for a £5, I would actually also say that this game is a must own. I understand the criticism for the time, but considering so many developers out there were trying to use this new DS touchscreen in new and interesting ways, I would go as far as saying that this is actually one of the more experimental ways to use it, and most importantly, it actually works. Of course, when Namco established that Pac-Man could be used as a ball just like everybody else, a pinball spin-off was of course created, and this one for the Game Boy Advance is perfectly average. Look, it's not bad, but they really did not experiment with this one enough to make it worth your while. We have all played good pinball spin-off games such as Metroid Pinball, which has still got to be my personal favourite, and we have no doubt played our fair share of pretty bland ones too. This is sadly one of the bland to average ones. Sure, the simple idea behind the idea of using Pac-Man as a ball is here, and I do like the small little extras it adds, such as finding your way through a blocked out Pac-Man maze in a short space of time. But even Pac-Man is a game series that started off simple, has so much to work with by this point, and the majority of that just gets thrown out of the window with this release. The game didn't exactly sell all that well upon release, and to be expected, it got about 5 out of 10 across the board, which was why the DS sequel was cancelled. A real shame, because this should have been an easy win for Namco. Pac-Man in pinball? It's so obvious it hurts. And you know what else is obvious? Making a kart game. Yeah, he's a mascot, he's even got his own 3D platforming games too. So obviously Pac-Man World Rally was coming up next. Heck, I'm surprised it took this long. So what's it gonna be? A Mario Kart spin-off that does what Crash Bandicoot did? Or a Mario Kart spin-off that does what, I don't know, Hello Kitty did? Drum roll, please. Thankfully, this game is almost as good as Crash Team Racing. Yes! It's an awesome little title. I don't know if it was because the world was getting bored with kart races at the time, which is why it got pretty average reviews at the time, but I was genuinely blown away by how good this was. Sure, it's not as good as CTR, but the amount of control you get over your karts, the weapons you have at your disposal, and the way that all of this works together just blends so nicely. Seriously, why are more people not bringing up this game? It is a hidden gem, thank you very much. It's really solid, just like the best games of the genre. You have plenty of extra modes and unlockables, including a couple of extra ones exclusive to the PSP release for some reason. And even though it did get some pretty average scores from tired reviewers, it of course sold very well. I mean, it's a Mario Kart clone with a recognizable character. They're always going to do well enough, and because of this, it actually got a sequel in 2010 on iOS devices called Pac-Man Kart Rally. Now this is more like it. A generic kart racer that's actually pretty rubbish. A kart racing cash grab. This is what we've all come to expect from the genre. A few characters that are involved in this ever-growing world, hard to use controls, boring gameplay, forgettable set pieces, and a game that is so forgettable that when it was randomly delisted from Google's Play Store, no one even realised for quite some time. And because of this, the date will probably never be known. This one is again one to avoid, which thankfully you've really got no choice but to do that thing.
Fun fact, did you know
that the original release of Pac-Man World Rally was the first game in almost a decade to fix the naming of Clyde and Blinky the Ghost, as since the mid-90s the names of these two characters had been reversed from what they were called in the original arcade titles. Yes, even the games that had those arcade games as unlockables. Right guys, we have covered a lot of games so far, but one thing that is different about this complete history compared to pretty much all of the others is the fact that the original game designer was not involved with the majority of the sequels. Well, that was all about to change with the rebirth of the series and the game that's going to take it back to its roots. Toru Iwatani was back as the game designer, and with the help of his team, most notably Tadashi Igarashi, they decided to chuck away everything that has happened over the last few decades and take Pac-Man back to his roots.
A lot of what Iwatani-san would talk to me about was the whole fundamentals of what a game is, and why a game is fun and compelling, everlasting, and almost eternal in its gaminess, its fun and entertaining qualities. The key, Iwatani would say, is that simplicity makes it endearing and compelling, and not bogging it down with extra this and that. We're just getting to the core, and making sure the core is well structured and well thought out, and will create an everlasting game or fun experience to continually replay.
That was Nobutaka Nakajima, the producer of Iwatani's rightful return to the Pac-Man IP. What made this particular game so important was yet again the emergence of a new generation of gaming consoles. Now obviously older gaming systems had played around with HD graphics in the past, but nothing like this. To many, myself included, the Xbox 360 was my first true experience of 1080 gaming. And on top of that, the Xbox 360 also brought affordable arcade-like games to the masses. The Xbox Live Arcade service was a service that provided small bite-sized arcade-like games for anything between a few quid to around about £20. Of course, all of these classic game companies that had been around forever saw this as the perfect opportunity to release their classics, or as Tadashi Egurushi put it, their masterpiece games. And of course, right at the top of the list was Namco's Pac-Man. The original Pac-Man that yet again was ported to yet again another home console yet again. Now the problem with doing this, of course, is the fact that 1, we have all played this game before a million times, and 2, it still has a pretty big problem. And that problem is the fact that the majority of the screen is taken up by borders. Now thankfully the Nintendo Switch actually fixes this issue, but the Xbox 360 didn't. As good as the game was, it was never intended to be on a system that supports widescreen, nor was it meant to be in HD. The end result is a beautiful border that takes up over half of the screen and a small area where you play the classic game. The time to remake the classic idea of Pac-Man was now, and the team wanted to use what the 360 and PlayStation 3 brought to the table, that being widescreen support and HD graphics. This was the seed for the next project. And with the original designer on board producing what he said would be his final ever game, they collectively agreed on this new/old approach. The game, of course, was Pac-Man Championship Edition, a game that is so good, Toru Iwatani has in more recent years actually stated that this game is better than his original 1980s video game. Pac-Man Championship Edition takes what made Pac-Man great and showed the world that you simply can't beat the classics, taking the point collection aspect of the game, the chasing aspect of the game, and the speed aspect of the game, and only really working with those mechanics. This game is without a doubt the best and most logical continuation since Ms. Pac-Man. Reviewers love the quick thinking maze-like logic, trying to work out how you're going to take your path as quick as you can, collecting the fruit and seeing a new path which you need to quickly decipher appear on the opposite side of the screen. Doing this for as often as you can in the short time limit, and of course dodging and hopefully munching on as many ghosts as humanly possible in a nice big combo. With the majority of Xbox 360s online, never was there a better time than to show off your amazing scores that you were pulling off in Championship Edition. And sure, even though the majority of hardcore gamers were obviously looking at whatever new multiplayer maps they could get or whatever big gun they could unlock in whatever Medal of Heroes game they were playing, in the online arcade space, Pac-Man was dominating, and rightfully so. He continued to do this very thing, even with the release of the upgraded, re-releasey sort of game, Pac-Man Championship Edition DX. Yet again, a game that only does what it needs to, and because of that simple mechanic on new HD screens with neon-esque filled mazes, pumping techno music and super fast speeds, Pac-Man has never looked so good, and it's doubtful he ever will again. The sequel of sorts brings in even more ghosts and modes, again never straying too far away from the original idea, but making the whole experience feel far more exciting and intense in spots. Purposeful slowdowns when you get close to ghosts and seemingly endless amounts of ghosts sleeping around the maze creates insanely long ghost conga lines chasing you until you get a power pellet, turn around and pull off one of the most satisfying moments in all of Pac-Man history as you massacre them all. On top of that, the game is full of little nods that may look like cosmetic upgrades, but in fact prove as incredible little history pieces to Pac-Man. And as this is the complete history, I suppose I should briefly bring up the free add-on called Pac-Man Championship Edition DX Plus, which adds even more scoreboardy goodies and loads of DLC content such as reskins for other classic Namco franchises. It really is easily one of the best games on this entire list. Now, whilst talking about these DX and DX Plus games, we've actually jumped forward a few years here, because before those games and after Championship Edition, we actually got a whole heap of new Pac-Man games. Pac-Motos is a part of the Namco Museum remix that blends together the worlds of Pac-Man and the arcade classic Motos. It's a top-down ball-like game where you move around a floating square board, knocking projectiles off the playing field until you are one of the only ones left. It's basic and it works, mostly because the game is essentially a reskin of the 2006 Japan-only PSP game Moto's Arrangement. Literally, the exact same game, bosses and everything. Pac-Man Pizza Parlor is, yes, something that actually exists. A PC-only game that tells the story of a random old pizza owner guy who gets spooked by a Pac-Man ghost, falls down, hits his head, loses his memory, not even knowing who his own daughter is at the hospital. He then tells her to put a quarter in the old Pac-Man arcade machine that's in storage. She does that very thing. Pac-Man jumps out of the arcade cabinet and the daughter plus Pac-Man duo then work together to run the pizza parlor. Everyone's happy, except for the dad, who's obviously suffering with dementia. The way it works is that in this game, you control both Pac-Man and Kathy at the pizza parlor in a time management game. People order stuff at the counter, and you need to click where you want Pac-Man to go in what I assume is the kitchen, who will then shoot that food to Kathy's side of the screen, where she will need to either serve it up straight away or put it in the oven before cooking it. The story gets ridiculous as you try to uncover more things for your forgetful father, and you quickly realise that he has loads of debts and loans, so you end up working doubly hard to pay them off, making more elaborate meals to as many customers as you can in a short space of time. What this all has to do with Pac-Man, I'll never know. I mean, maybe it's got something to do with the fact that the pizza is part of his creation, but then again, I never actually got anywhere in the game where this was ever mentioned. Who knows? However, guys, I will say this. Pac-Man Pizza Parlor is actually a pretty good game. Yes, mobile gamers have no doubt played millions of games like this. It doesn't really bring anything new to the table in that regard, but I can't deny it, guys. I thoroughly enjoyed my time with Pac-Man Pizza Parlor. Don't judge me. Look, I'll probably get bored of it after a few more turns, but right now, all I want to do is go back and play more Pac-Man Pizza Parlor. Anyway, next up was Pac-Man Party for the Wii, which of course is yet again another Mario Party ripoff, but surprisingly, it too is actually pretty good. Sure, it starts off a little slow, but as the game is heavily focused on you collecting sets of items around the game in a Monopoly-style setting, it actually gets quite frantic quite quickly. Plus, the board and minigames themselves are for the most part pretty speedy and quite well done. For me, it could possibly be better than some of the later Mario Party games themselves, but of course, not as good as the classics, which you would obviously find on the GameCube. Go in with media expectations like I did, and you might actually be pleasantly surprised with this title. This also got a port a year later for the 3DS, which sadly isn't as good. The minigames themselves are quite fun. I wouldn't go as far as to say the actual board gamey side of things is much fun at all. Which finally brings us back up to speed. 2010, the 30th anniversary of Pac-Man. A lot of the games mentioned so far actually came out this year to celebrate the little yellow dot's birthday. And also, Google did the iconic Google Doodle, which was an actual playable version of Pac-Man around the Google logo. You can actually still find that and play it, by the way, by simply searching for Pac-Man. In Japan, he got an exclusive crossover game with Bomberman, Pac-Man X Bomberman, which sounds amazing, although is sadly no longer available to actually play. And of course, he finally came back to the arcades with, wait for it, Pac-Man Battle Royale. Do you remember when people were sick of yet another Battle Royale game until Nintendo came along and did it right? Well, move aside, fanboys, because Pac-Man got there first with this bloody awesome Battle Royale game that is definitely one of the ones you should go and try. It's pretty simple in this arcade title that was the first released in 14 years, I might add. You control one of 4 different coloured Pac-Men in a maze collecting as many fruits and dots as possible. However, if you get a power pellet, you'll blow up in size temporarily, similar to Super Pac-Man, and then this gives you the chance to not only eat the ghosts, but your opponents too. The real winner is the one at the end that has the best combination of all of these things. It is awesome. Pac-Man Tilt is a side-scrolling platformer that lets you quite literally tilt your 3DS console in order to manipulate the world around you. It's pretty basic in all honesty, fun for what it is, but you will soon get bored of it. Most of the levels, as pretty and neon-filled as they do look, are actually all very, very similar. And unfortunately, the novelty of tilting the 3DS to simply get up a slightly out-of-reach ledge does get boring before it gets fun. And this was the same year, that's 2013 by the way, that Pac-Man got himself yet again another new show. Pac-Man and the Ghostly Adventures is a show that my son has actually watched a few times on Netflix, and even though this seems like a failed reboot in the same vein as Sonic Boom, it actually is pretty good. The show does what it can to appeal to kids whilst fleshing out the rather simple world the game provides. Pac-Man is a kid now, and one of the new ghosts, who looks like an Avril Lavigne wannabe, secretly has a crush on him. Along with his new friends and family, it's up to Pac-Man to save the day from other ghosts, which are obviously the bad guys. It's all very, very basic and nothing I've ever really had too much interest in watching. If my son's watching it, I'll check it out, and he quite likes it. It done well enough to get 3 seasons and 52 episodes, and of course, a whole heap of video games. Firstly, you got the game with the same name for the Wii U and eventually other systems too, which is of course a 3D platformer based on the show, which is in itself loosely based on the World Series, which is based on the arcade originals. You keeping up? I've never played this game before this review, and I don't know, maybe this is the dad in me, but for a game that I would let my son play, it's again actually pretty good. It's similar in the way the earlier World games play, you know, collectibles, platforming, all that good stuff. But unlike those games that actually provide a decent level of hard platforming, this one is a little more aimed at a younger generation, which again, for this kind of game, is fine. Seasoned 3D platforming fans will find it easy, but I doubt you'll ever get bored. It's a surprisingly polished game for youngsters, and actually pretty good gameplay-wise too. I mean, the story is terrible, completely forgettable in fact, but the main core of the game is perfectly above average. Put this in the hands of its target audience and they should find enjoyment in it. Unlike the previous 3D games, this one has plenty of power-ups that actually relate to what happens in the show, or at least I'm told, and this thankfully gives Pac-Man some neat new moves for a short while that any 3D platforming fan will get to grips with instantly. Overall, the game is a perfectly fine 7 out of 10 game. It's nothing more than that, it's perfectly above average. Of course, being that it was a platformer based on a kids TV show, a 3DS version was right around the corner, and surprisingly this one is actually quite different, being that it's more of a 2D side scroller. Again, it's as standard as they come. It definitely isn't as appealing as the console version. Pac-Man has the same kind of move sets as Yoshi, doing that little kick run thing at the end of his jumps, but feeling a lot more weighty. Like the console games, there is fun to have here, it's just a shame that it doesn't push the formula as much as it perhaps should. Unfortunately, very little gets changed up with this title, and again, it's another perfectly fine 7 out of 10 type game. And again, the same goes for its sequel, which literally adds nothing new to the game whatsoever. It's the same game, but with different level layouts, some of which are the same locations, so it feels more like an upgrade. Again, kids might like it, and it does play perfectly fine. The problem is, nothing is memorable in the slightest. It looks pretty and bland at the same time. Did I enjoy my short time with it? Yeah, sure. Enough to give it a 7 out of 10 again at least. Maybe slightly less than my son. Actually, by this point, wasn't all that bothered about this game. Right, finally time to get back to the good stuff again, because we've only got a few games to go, guys. Yes, we have nearly covered every single Pac-Man game. And this one, yet again, takes inspiration from the incredible original. How many people look at the original as an endless game? Of course, most players, myself included, can never really get past 2 or 3 mazes before they run out of lives. But one of the more interesting discoveries to be found in the game is that if you are good enough, you can actually beat it. Getting to level 256 may take a few hours, but when you do get there, the game simply can't handle it anymore and essentially breaks. This bug became so popular that many games and different media formats actually showed homage to that particular glitch. Like the end of Wreck-It Ralph and the 256th level on the Google Doodle. Yes, the glitch is actually in the Google Doodle. And this was when Hipster Whale, who were riding high on the success of their mobile game, Crossy Road, contacted Namco to create a game based on this glitch. Now, as a mobile game, it's great. It genuinely is. For those that complain that they wish they could just pay a small fee to get unlimited lives rather than counting down the clock to restore them, well, they can do that very thing. But thankfully, the game proved so popular that it ended up on consoles too, which is obviously the better version to own. In the isometric game, you control Pac-Man in a maze, constantly moving up the screen, getting as many points as you can by collecting dots, power-ups, and eating ghosts. Just like before, the ghosts themselves can get you, but the real challenge is in you running away from the ever-approaching 256 glitch that creeps up on the screen. It's simple, and my god, does it work. The game is incredibly good. It takes a few liberties with the license, giving you lasers and bombs and chucking all of these weird coloured ghosts on the screen, but it's really not an issue. The game is utterly fantastic, a real treat to play. Just like all of the best games in the franchise before it, the goal is to get the very best score imaginable, and the best way to do it is to try to run over 256 dots without passing any areas that don't have dots or backtracking once again. It's a little tough to do, but when you do pull it off, it gives you a real sense of achievement that makes the whole thing worthwhile. Another must-own game, in my opinion. And following on from this, we got yet another pretty good game, Pac-Man Championship Edition 2, which, although is really good, is sadly not as good as the original Pac-Man Championship Edition. This time, the super fast and slick design, similar to the original, is bogged down a little with the power pellet path being a bit too obvious. It's not always easy, but considering in this title you can actually ricochet off the ghosts before they attack you, it actually takes away some of that traumatic on the edge of your seat gameplay that the original crafted so well. That's not to say it's a bad game, it's really not a bad game. Every time you jump to the next screen, you get a good look at what's available to you. You then shoot around the maze with crazy speeds to super fast techno music, and when you finally do take on the super long chain that you've been building up, it's immensely satisfying. Again, not as good as DX Plus, but still a rock solid entry. Pac-Man Party Royale is a follow-up to the arcade Battle Royale game, and besides the now overly cute and floaty design that Namco decided to give these characters, the game is again pretty rock solid. If you have 4 people to play with, that is. Again, it's simply the last ghost standing. However, to make it more interesting for the players that drop out early by getting attacked by ghosts, in this game, when that happens, you turn into the ghosts. If you attack another Pac-Man while in ghost form, then you come back as Pac-Man. It's a nice addition. Also, you all start the game at a slow pace. The more pellets you eat, the faster you get, which again is a nice little touch. I doubt this one will last forever as it's an Apple Store exclusive, so I suggest that you get playing this one whilst you can. Which finally brings us to the final game. Yes, the final game in the entire Pac-Man list of video games. a game that is actually not too dissimilar from the original Pac-Man, but is actually the very best of the Battle Royale series of games. And yeah, it's also probably the very best multiplayer Pac-Man game too. There is just one problem, and I'll get to that in a little bit. Pac-Man Mega Tunnel Battle is incredible. You fly around a fairly typical, although beautifully stylized to your taste maze, dodging ghosts or chasing them when you get the power pellets, etc, etc. But the big difference is that 64 real-world players are playing this game at the same time, and you can actually invade their mazes and take them on too, stealing their power-ups and going back into their own maze, which you will want to complete, by the way, as it will power up your Pac-Man, which again comes in handy as you take out your opponents and try to be the last Pac standing. Literally, there is nothing wrong with this game whatsoever. It's an absolute joy to play. Of course, you need an internet connection, yada yada yada, but for what it's aiming to do, it's undoubtedly the best of the Battle Royale genre. So, what's the issue? Stadia. It's a Stadia exclusive. Boy, oh boy, do I hope this one comes to other platforms, because it really is so much fun. And as of the time of its release, which just so happens to be 2020, the 40th anniversary of Pac-Man, it really is the perfect way to celebrate the little yellow dot's birthday. That is, of course, unless you was like me and you was able to get your hands on the 40th anniversary Quarter Arcade's Pac-Man mini arcade machine, which is absolutely stunning. Just a quick interruption here, guys, because as you probably know, Pac-Man Mega Tunnel Battle isn't actually the final game on this list. I'm losing my mind here, guys. I'm trying to make a history video covering every single Pac-Man game ever, and yet, since scripting this complete history and then eventually editing it, we have had two new big Pac-Man releases. The first one is Pac-Man Geo, a game based on yet another Google experiment, or at least an April Fool's Day joke, where you actually turn small sections of Google Maps into a game of Pac-Man, and well, this is a more refined version of that. It opened up being a bit buggy and feeling a bit rushed, but since then has had a fair few updates, and honestly, I mean, you know, it is what it is. It's fun to travel the world and see it with a new lick of paint. Get this now if you are interested, because my money is on this bad boy going away for good eventually. And finally, and yes, I do mean finally this time, after Nintendo wowed the Battle Royale world with Tetris 99 and then confused the world by removing yet another Battle Royale game called Mario Bros 35, they instantly gained some of that credibility back when they dropped Pac-Man 99. Yet another Battle Royale game. This is absolutely insane. If I'm not mistaken now, this is 4 variants just on the Battle Royale formula within the Pac-Man universe, and yet again, it's awesome. How many more times can they add a unique twist to this niche format? Now, unlike Pac-Man Mega Tunnel Battle, which is more about collectibles and attacking ghosts and your opponents, and unlike Party Royale and Battle Royale, which are a lot more standard in their approach, Pac-Man 99 is seriously manic. And I'm hoping that if you've managed to make your way through this insane list of Pac-Man games, that you are going to be pretty good at this particular version. I highly suggest checking this title out. It's so much fun, and 41 years after the original release, it's still familiar and of course different enough to actually make it stand on its own. Collecting dots to make you go faster and taking out long chains of ghosts, and yet again a big old conga line to then insert extra things in other people's mazes to slow them down or to take them out. It ends up becoming so incredibly frantic almost instantly, and I wouldn't have it any other way. And unlike Mario Bros 35, which honestly I never played again after I finally became the last Mario standing, this game has way more replayability for me. Hopefully this one sticks around longer, and I assume it will with all of its rather insane DLC. All we need now is for this bad boy to be released physically. Wow. What an incredible journey. Sure, it had its bad moments, but I was genuinely surprised at just how solid this vast majority of these titles were. When it comes down to video game mascots, nobody is more iconic than this guy. And although Miss Pac-Man has sadly been a little neglected due to Namco having to pay a royalty to GCC for every appearance since her release, yes, this is why you don't see that game ported as often and why she changes her name so frequently. But considering these games are still being lapped up by fans around the world, there is no sign of Pac-Man ever slowing down, especially with all his cameos in some of gaming's most popular franchises. So, what do I say? I say bring it on, Pac-Man. We aren't sick of this little guy yet. Give us more ghosts, give us more mazes, and never stop letting us whacker our way through these mostly brilliant games. Long live Pac-Man. Hey there guys, thank you all for checking out the video. Yeah, this one was a long one. Definitely going to do something a bit shorter next time. But yeah, I was so proud of finally being able to do Pac-Man, the complete history, as its full history. There was even 2 games that came out during the making of this, Pac-Man Geo and Pac-Man 99 obviously. So it was hardcore, but I've finally done it and I'm very proud of the response. I hope you guys like it too. Yeah, massive thank you to all of my patrons and YouTube members that allow me to make these ridiculous videos that I enjoy making, honestly. You know, I don't have to adhere to the algorithm and put out loads of clickbaity videos and whatever the next big thing is, or rumors of whatever else. It's these guys that allow me to create videos like these that I hope you guys like to consume and yeah, I like to make. So thank you all so much, with an extra big special shout out going to Aaron Gorman, Andrew Dalton, Andrew Ward, Arista, Benjamin Guy, Big Rico, Bram Perez, Brandon Gold, Cheshire One, Chris the Shapeshifter, Christopher DeVeo, Clan Bob, Kobo 4747, Conrad Constantine, Cremilla, The Action Saxon, Daniel Tarares, Dina 81, Dagsy B, Dominic Devonport, Francisco Courts, Game Apologist, Gary Pinkett, Harvey 2478, Intrigued Gaming, Jay is Manchild, Jabba Al Aiden, Jacob P, aka Avalon Janes, Jeremy Rodriguez, Jonathan Hayward, Kinglink Reviews, Lucas Softel, Lipped, Man of God 9000, Man Shovel, Michael Ridley Dash, Michael Towns, Mike Fallon, Mind of the Unsane, Nicholas Burtner, Nick Pollard, Nightwheel, Pretendo 64, Roll VP, RetroReversing.com, Retro to Next Gen, aka Lou, Richard Alderjic, Rocketplod, Rovan Army, Ryan Holt, Sashi Dog, Samuel Nielsen, Shade Silence, Shadow Dragon, Solix Captor, Stephen, Taylor Rainwater, That Gamer, The Cunning Linguist, The Shaded J, Tim Labonte, Tim Lunn, Trans Rights, Vike Echo, Wiki Studios, Wobbles and Bean, The Wonder Ducks, Ye Old Hamburger, and YouTube Tier 3. I'm sure that one's not supposed to be there. Thank you all so much for allowing me to make videos like this as stated. If you guys want to support the show as well, see videos like this early, see them as they're being made in sort of making of early edits of the videos. You can see the Kickscammer exclusive episodes before they go live. Loads of other awesome perks too in the Discord. Yeah, it's well worth signing up if you ask me. Yeah, please do consider doing so, and do it for as little as you wish by becoming a YouTube member or Patreon. Links are down below. But anyway guys, again, thank you for watching the show. I hope you enjoyed it. This is DJ Slope signing out, and hopefully I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.